Cinematic universes, classic comedies, and absolute epics could have looked entirely different if this lot were successful in getting the parts they initially wanted. So I am Gareth, this is What Culture, and here are 10 actors who landed different movie roles to the ones they auditioned for. Number 10, Rachel McAdams, Mean Girls. In what eventually turned out to be a breakthrough year for the ages, the fantastic Rachel McAdams starred in both The Notebook and Mean Girls back in 2004, and it was her tremendous work as the ridiculously quotable leader of the Plastics, Regina George, in that latter project that still arguably sits as the actor's most iconic performance to date. However, that wasn't actually the role she had her eyes on back when McAdams was auditioning for a part in director Mark Waters' movie. As Waters himself would explain years on from the eventual teen hits release, despite McAdams being incredible during her audition for the part of Katie Heron, the innocent 16-year-old who transfers to the Plastics High School, the director felt the 25-year-old star was just a bit too old for that ingenue character. The team behind the movie originally felt Lindsay Lohan would have made for a great Regina too at one point, but after swapping those roles around during the testing process, Waters noticed how Lohan got a little nervous around the older and experienced McAdams. After that, it soon became clear that the older actor was the better choice for Regina, and the rest was captivating history. Number 9, Rebel Wilson, Bridesmaids. From one legendary comedy to another, the side-splitting Bridesmaids also boast one of the strongest largely female ensembles in movie history. Among those utterly hilarious names like the terrific Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy and Maya Rudolph was the equally comical Rebel Wilson, of course, with the Australian actor playing the part of one of Annie Walker's rather odd British roommates, Bryn, in the 2011 flick. Before ultimately landing that specific part in the modern classic, however, Wilson actually threw her name into the hat for another role in the movie. As the star would later reveal on Sirius XM, Bryn wasn't even a part of the film originally, but after Wilson had auditioned for the character of Megan Price, a role eventually played by McCarthy, and became the second choice for that part after impressing the team casting the movie, she was eventually just added in as an additional roommate to Annie instead. From there, the wonderful comedy performer was given the freedom to improvise through the majority of her scenes with the likes of Wiig and Matt Lucas, ensuring her evident talent didn't go to waste after not quite doing enough to land the Price part. What's your favorite comedy flick of all time, people? You let me know in the comment section down below. I like Bridesmaids. Number 8, Lee Pace, Guardians of the Galaxy. A ton of stars out there were all doing their best to convince James Gunn they were the person for the Star-Lord job, coming into the MCU's first Guardians of the Galaxy project. And along with thespians such as Zachary Levi and Glenn Howerton, a performer who would actually end up appearing in that first volume also auditioned for the role of Peter Quill, a part eventually secured by Chris Pratt, of course. All the way back in 2012, none other than eventual Ronan the Accuser himself, Lee Pace, actually revealed he was trying to land the role of the celestial human Guardian of the Galaxy. In a conversation with MTV, the Hobbit star admitted he'd been reading up on the one-time Ravager before stating that the character was a lot of fun, and that he hopes it works out. And it sort of did, in a way. Sure, he didn't end up being cast as that lovable fool in the end, but Pace did still do enough to earn himself the part of the flick's ruthless big bad Kree, and even popped up in Captain Marvel a few years later too. He did alright. Number 7, Sebastian Stan, Captain America, the First Avenger. Sticking with the MCU for this next entry, the First Avenger was also a coveted role wanted by some of the most talented stars in Hollywood all those years ago. It's well known that eventual Mr. Fantastic cameo star John Krasinski got as far as the costume fitting / testing stage for the Captain America part before Chris Evans was ultimately offered the role. But did you know that the guy who eventually played Steve Rogers' bestest bud also tried to get his hands on the iconic shield too? That's right, Sebastian Stan originally auditioned to play Cap in 2011's Captain America, the First Avenger, but after the folks casting that early MCU picture sensed a bit of darkness there, he was eventually offered the role of Bucky instead. In hindsight, Stan himself was glad he he didn't arrive in the MCU as the most heroic and honorable superhero, eventually noting how he was extremely grateful to land the Bucky Barnes part rather than the Cap one. He felt it was simply meant to be, and it's admittedly hard to imagine anyone else bringing the deeply complex and eventually guilt-ridden Barnes to life quite as well as Stan. Number 6, Lily James, Cinderella. As difficult as it may be to believe, there was actually a time there when the magnetic Lily James didn't really see herself playing the titular princess in Disney's live-action version of Cinderella. The British thespian actually fancied playing one of Ella's stepsisters in the Kenneth Branagh-directed Tale, a part she felt could allow her to just be more quirky and comical, rather than worrying about being quote-unquote pretty. However, the casting director ultimately felt it would be a good idea to have her read for the part of Ella too while she was there, so she did, and James recalled that it just felt right. A few months later, and after going through a number of screen tests, with one of them even involving director Branagh playing the part of Prince Charming, he's a really good Prince Charming according to James, the star was eventually told she'd be playing the iconic princess in the flick. And with James going on to earn rave reviews for her breakthrough role as the central figure with a generous spirit, that decision to have her read a few lines during that stepsister audition turned out to be a masterstroke. Number 5, Heath Ledger and Matt Damon, the Brothers Grimm. This next entry doesn't technically involve a pair of stars who audition for a role before actually landing a different one in a big screen project, but it does contain a bizarre scenario that saw two already cast actors suddenly swapping parts before production began. You see, the magnificent Matt Damon had already been brought aboard Terry Gilliam's fantasy flick The Brothers Grimm as Jake Grimm, the more sensitive and somewhat quieter of the two brothers. However, Damon soon decided he didn't actually fancy playing the sort of part he'd already done before, and tried to convince his director to give him the Will Grimm role instead. That part was what Ben Affleck normally plays, according to Gilliam. Then, after just about finding a way to get Damon to continue on as Jake, Ledger stopped by the next morning to tell the director he actually wanted to play Jake for the same reasons as his co-star. Rather than trying to keep the lads in roles they clearly didn't have any interest in playing then, Gilliam swiftly decided to just give the two what they wanted. The late casting swap didn't save the film from becoming a critical and commercial flop, sadly, but it at least made the two leading lads a little happier. Number 4, Tom Hiddleston, Thor. Look, there isn't another human on planet Earth who would have fit the role of the God of Thunder better than the cocky yet sympathetic Australian known as Chris Hemsworth. But that charismatic Hemsworth brother wasn't the only bloke in the running for the MCU role of Thor all the way back in 2009. In fact, the star who would eventually step into the part of his often untrustworthy and never dull on-screen brother Loki, Tom Hiddleston, auditioned for the Thor role for 3 months. That mesmerizing British thespian actually never even auditioned for the part of Loki during that process either, according to the star himself when talking on The Tonight Show. And even though he wasn't quite right for the eventual Avenger, as seen in a surreal piece of footage showing off an American accent boasting Hiddleston's version of Thor, director Kenneth Branagh and the rest of the casting team clearly saw something mischievous and mercurial in the actor. So he was ultimately offered the chance to join the MCU as another character who would eventually become just as adored as any of Earth's mightiest heroes. Number 3, Orlando Bloom, the Lord of the Rings. Similarly to Chris Hemsworth holding Mjolnir, it is almost impossible to imagine any thespian other than Orlando Bloom sporting that luscious elvish hair and firing off arrows as part of the Fellowship of the Ring. But you will no doubt be shocked to learn that this wasn't even the role the young performer originally auditioned for back when Peter Jackson and co were casting their epic Lord of the Rings trilogy. That's according to Bloom himself, who noted how after attempting to land the part of Faramir, eventually played by David Wenham in the flicks, he was then asked to put himself on tape as the iconic Sindar elf of the Woodland Realm. Another meeting with Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh later, and Bloom soon learned he'd just booked his first job coming out of drama school, and what a job it was. The young British actor evidently just wouldn't have been the right choice for the brother of Boromir and captain of the Rangers of Ithilien, and the call to have Bloom read for the effortlessly cool eventual pal of Gimli instead was ultimately a wise one. Number 2, Tom Felton, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. As the irritating and devilish Draco Malfoy, Tom Felton produced consistently fabulous work throughout his time as part of the super popular Harry Potter series. And as with many of the actors found in those critically and commercially successful blockbusters, he soon became synonymous with his role of Harry's longtime Hogwarts nemesis. However, around the time director Chris Columbus was assembling his cast for that very first Harry Potter movie, The Philosopher's Stone, Felton was actually seriously close to being cast as the titular boy who lived. As Columbus Columbus recalled Tom was such a great actor, the team thought let's just dye Tom's hair, give him a scar, give him the glasses and let's see. But despite producing a great reading as Harry, the fact you could obviously tell when a child of the age of 11 or 12 possessed dyed hair resulted in Columbus not going with him for the role. Felton also just so happened to produce a superb Malfoy audition though, so Columbus was quite happy to offer him the chance to be Potter's thorn in his side for a few years instead. Number 1. Cillian Murphy, Batman Begins. Robert Downey Jr. may not have managed to land himself another role after a failed attempt at convincing Christopher Nolan to cast him in Batman Begins many years ago, but his Oppenheimer co-star sure did. Before Cillian Murphy would ultimately end up being offered that aforementioned Scarecrow role that RDJ once fancied, the always fascinating thespian auditioned to play the titular caped crusader in that first Nolan Batman movie. He even got to the stage where he donned the iconic suit and did screen tests as Bruce Wayne/Batman. And though Nolan could tell from that early test footage that Murphy wasn't quite as right for the part as Christian Bale was, his gripping work in those scenes resulted in the director finding another place for him in his movie. Following on from that impressive performance as his version of The Dark Knight, Nolan asked the studio to bring the talented Irish star in as the unsettling Dr. Jonathan Crane instead. As the years have rolled by, Murphy himself has openly admitted to feeling he just wasn't right for the leading role in this exceptional trilogy. But the actor was still able to make his mark in each of the 3 sensational Dark Knight features, before finally landing his first Nolan leading role in last year's magnificent Oppenheimer. Well played, Killian, you're a star.